Who's ready to learn how to live a longer and happier life? I know I am. Hi, my name's Seth Streeter, the CEO of Mission Wealth. Welcome to today's Inspired Talk, Blue Zones, Secrets of a Long Life, with New York Times bestselling author Dan Buettner. Before I introduce Dan, I wanted to share 4 quick notes about today's webinar. First, this is going to be recorded, and we will send everyone a link to the recording as well as a blog post of Dan's top takeaways. If you have questions you'd like to post, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And please use the chat box if you have any technical questions or would just like to make general comments. And when you make comments, please say to all panelists and attendees. At the end of the program, we will share a link to our next Inspired Talk as well as a survey for your valuable feedback. And we will email you this information as well. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Dan Buettner. I wish I had more time to tell you about all of his incredible accomplishments and his life journey, but let me assure you, Dan is a fascinating guy. Here are just a few of his highlights. In his 20s, Dan set 3 Guinness Book of World Records for transcontinental cycling. This included an over 15,000-mile journey from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, Argentina. This then followed with a 12,888-mile trek on the 45th parallel in the Soviet Union. And then he did an 8-month trek through the continent of Africa, cycling almost 12,000 miles. Dan won an Emmy Award for the PBS documentary that he co-produced about these expeditions, as well as for books he wrote on these cycling journeys. In his 30s, Dan led a new genre of exploration that enabled online audiences to join teams of experts to solve mysteries. So using laptops and newly demilitarized satellite dishes, they interacted with 40,000 classrooms for a multidisciplinary teaching experience. And with this innovative approach, they tackled the 9th century Maya collapse, they retraced Darwin's route on the Galapagos, and Marco Polo's trail on the Silk Road. In his 40s, Dan collaborated with expert anthropologists, historians, dietitians, and geneticists to study longevity, traveling the world to find the healthiest places. He, along with 2 other researchers, branded these locations the Blue Zones. In 2005, Dan reported these Blue Zone findings in a cover story for National Geographic called Secrets of Long Life, and this became the 3rd best-selling issue in the magazine's history. In 2008, Dan published the book Blue Zones, Lessons for Longer Living from People Who've Lived the Longest. This became a bestseller and launched him into the speaking circuit, including interviews with Oprah Winfrey, Dr. Oz, and Anderson Cooper 360. In 2009, he gave a TED Talk that today has almost 4.3 million views. And this, I would say, is when Dan really got started. He wanted to take what he learned about longevity and apply it at scale to American cities and states to improve health. And so he created an organization called the Blue Zones Project. And this team worked all over the United States, including Fort Worth, Texas, Naples, Florida, South Bend, Indiana, and to the states of Iowa and Hawaii. And consistently, they produced impressive health results as well as significant health cost savings. So in addition to leading this successful company, Dan went back to writing, and he created a series of best-selling books. In 2015, he published The Blue Zone Solution, Eating and Living Like the World's Healthiest People. In 2017, he published The Blue Zones of Happiness, and in 2019, he published The Blue Zones Kitchen. And Dan has more writing projects up his sleeve I'm sure he'll share with us today. I know we are all ready to learn how we can live longer and happier lives from the man who truly lives this by example. Please welcome Dan Buettner.
Well, thank you, Seth. I'm right back at you. For any of you who know Seth knows that he's the consummate Blue Zone individual, builds community, knows how to stay fit, knows how to eat, brings people together and shares ideas. And I'm really pleased and honored to be with you this morning. I'm going to talk about the world's longest lived people and the lessons they offer us. I know most of you guys and women are about my age, probably a pretty similar point in life, and probably pretty interested in not only getting the most years out of life, but the most life out of years. And for about 20 years now, I've been identifying and studying the statistically longest lived people. Something called the Danish twin study established that only about 20% of how long you live is dictated by your genes. The other 80% is something else. So the idea I've been working with, beginning with the National Institutes on Aging, but then mostly with National Geographic, was to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity. Once you find the statistically longest lived people, given that they have an average set of genes, if you can identify the common denominators, you get a pretty convincing set of lessons and prescriptives on what we could do to add more good years out of life. And just to switch over here to the screen. We found these so-called blue zones in 5 different parts of the world. These places aren't anecdotal. I worked with demographers. We spent 2.5 years parsing through worldwide census data and then traveling to each of these places to confirm that they were indeed longest lived. And when I say longest lived, I don't only mean the highest concentration of centenarians, but almost more interesting is their middle-age life expectancy. So factoring out infant mortality and the sort of toxic teen years or lethal teen years, and then the lowest rates of middle-age mortality. So let me tell you the value proposition here. So the average maximum life expectancy for the average person living in the United States is about 94. So in other words, if you do everything right, you should be able to live 94 years, but on average, we're only living 80. So we're leaving about 14 years on the table. And these populations have achieved most of those 40 years. And most significantly, they've achieved them without diabetes, obesity, cancers of the GI tract, dementia, and heart disease. So they have what most of us want, to live a long, vital life and then die quickly, leaving the maximum amount left over for their heirs. Now, because I work for National Geographic, they're really sticklers for evidence. We put together a world-class board of experts and advisors, the demographers, and then the people who knew the methodology to go into these places to plumb the existing academic literature to find the correlations and indeed the explanations. And interestingly, no matter where you go in the world and you find long-lived people, you see the same 9 common denominators. And I'm going to share those 9 common denominators with you and sort of give you an operating system to get the most years out of life. But because I have the advantage of National Geographic photography, I thought first I'd take you to each of these blue zones to give you a feeling for what it's like to live in these places. We found the first blue zone about 200 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia, not the entire island, just inland, sort of central Sardinia, called the Nuoro province. And there we found 5 villages, about 60,000 people, with the highest concentration of male centenarians in the world. So in that blue bullseye there, you have an area, the original blue zone, by the way, where there's about 11 times more male centenarians than you would expect to find in an equivalent population, say here in the United States. And these are guys not only making it to 100, they're doing so with vigor and vitality, still riding their bikes to work at 102, chopping wood at 106, and beating a guy 65 years younger than him in an arm wrestle. That, by the way, interview took place at 7 in the morning after this guy had his first tumbler of red wine. So as you can see, you can live a long time without depriving yourself. So I worked with a very clever physician epidemiologist in Sardinia, a guy by the name of Gianni Pes. And between the two of us, we interviewed about 350 male centenarians over time. And if you want to know what a 100-year-old lived to be 100, you have to know not just what they're doing lately, but you have to know what they were doing, you know, as a kid and young adult and working life and retiree and then lately. And when we crunched all of that data, we found three of the biggest predictors of making it to 100. And I'll give you them in reverse order. The third biggest predictor was actually the steepness of the terrain of their village. So of all other factors, what they ate, what they drank, stress, religion, the steepness of their village was number three. Number two was how many daughters they had. Turns out the guys most likely to make to 100 had 5 or more daughters. Now, we don't know if the longevity benefit of daughters comes from the fact that they tend to take care of their aging parents better than perhaps sons do, or if you can survive 5 adolescent girls, making it to 100 is no problem. But nevertheless, it seems having daughters favors longevity. But the biggest predictor of making it to 100 in Sardinia was your profession. And it turns out that, most of Sardinia traditionally were the farmers who lived on the coast and the shepherds who lived in the mountains, inland. And indeed, it was the shepherds that were enjoying this extraordinary longevity benefit. So we embed it with the centenarian, with the Sardinians here, to get a feel for what their life was like. And, much to our surprise, they didn't work all that hard. They sort of wake up when the sun is warm, spend a few hours with their animals. We figure they walk maybe 3 miles in a morning, but very gentle. Since many parts of the year they're covering vast terrain to get enough vegetation for their animals, they had to invent a diet that wouldn't spoil over time without refrigerator. They came up with a type of whole wheat, durum wheat bread called carta de musica. They made cheese from their own animals, grass-fed, very high in omega-3 fatty acids, very rich, so they don't have to eat a lot of it, called pecorino. And then a type of wine that has 3 times the levels of polyphenols of any other known wine. Nothing like dirty boots to add terroir. This is homemade stuff. We call it Blue Zones wine, which is available here, but it's technically a Continental wine. And it's applied liberally throughout the day. It adds up to about 3 glasses a day, but it's taken in small doses in the morning with meals, with friends after dinner. But it's a very rich, dark red wine full of the procyanid, which is the antioxidant that relieves inflammation of the endothelium. When they're at home, they're eating a version of the Mediterranean diet. Here in Sardinia, very high in fava beans. They do eat meat, no beef, very little chicken, but pork they eat once in a while, about 5 times a month, not a lot, usually a portion not too much bigger than this clicker right here. But they're eating meat as a celebratory food, usually after church on Sunday or a wedding or a birthday or something, but sparing use of meat. But more important than their diet and their exercise patterns, and I know Americans like to focus a lot on diet and exercise, but we actually found other social determinants of health, bigger drivers of longevity. These people were original Sardinians from the highlands, a fanatic zeal for the family, a very strong community connection. They required that to survive during the millennia as the Arabs and the Phoenicians and the Romans tried to subjugate them. By the way, this is very different people. These people originated, the founder population of Sardinia originated in what's today the Basque country. They've assimilated a little bit, but they speak a language most similar to the language Romans spoke, most similar to the Latin. Unlike us in the United States, they celebrate age. The older you are, the more wisdom, the more you're treasured. The idea of putting your retired or a parent in a home would be shame to the family. So older people are kept around where their skills and their wisdom is harnessed. Their agricultural skill, in this case, it's winemaking skill. It's the grandmas that keep the food tradition alive. There's actually a type of sourdough bread that lowers the glycemic load of every single meal, a sourdough bread, and it's the grandmas that keep the culture alive, literally the lactobacillus that inoculates sourdough bread. Indeed, something called the grandmother effect has shown that having a grandmother in the home or near the home is not only good for grandma, it's also good for children. The grandmother effect has shown that children live in homes with a grandparent actually have lower rates of disease, lower rates of mortality, and they do better in school. So it's this beautiful virtuous circle that in this case is adding up not quite to the 14 extra years of life expectancy, but about 9 extra years of life expectancy, and they're good years. On the other side of the planet, about 800 miles south of Tokyo, on the archipelago of Okinawa, we found the world's longest lived women, a cohort of women over 60, where you find about 30 times more female centenarians than you would expect to find in the United States. This is a population till about 1970, a full 65, or about 2/3 of their dietary intake came from sweet potatoes, purple sweet potatoes called emo. That purple pigment is the same pigment you see in blueberries with the same antioxidants, and about 8 times more tofu. You also see a lot of turmeric, a lot of root vegetables, garlic, and a vegetable called bitter melon, also known as Goya. So the food tends to be very low density, but high nutrient content. You could be sitting down to what looks like a compost pile of food that fills you up gloriously, but it has fewer calories than a hamburger. But again, more important than diet, there's social norms. In the United States, if you don't have at least 3 friends you can count on a bad day when your chips are down, that meets the technical definition of loneliness. In Okinawa, since childhood, people have had a committed social circle they call a moai, M-O-A-I, moai, and they travel through life with this pod of people that serve as kind of a security safety net that also works kind of with stress. You go through life knowing that you always have someone at your back. The reason I show this picture here is that these 5 girls have belonged to the same moai for 97 years. Their average age is 102. They still get together every night. They drink sake. They gossip. They argue about who that hot guy liked best back in 1941. But yet they still look out after each other, and they really don't need that nurse or that home. When one of them doesn't show up for happy hour, the other 4 put their kimono on and shuffle across the village to check on their friend. It's really a beautiful social construct. Also interesting, I know a lot of you guys are thinking about retirement. And interestingly, the Okinawan language has no word for retirement. Instead, one word imbues their entire adult life, and that word is ikigai, which roughly means life purpose or the reason I get up in the morning. And it imbues adult life from early 20s all the way through the hundreds. This 102-year-old karate master will tell you his ikigai is passing down karate. This fisherman no longer fishes professionally, but he puts his goggles on and spears fish every morning. So he has an excuse to go to his children and his grandchildren's house, bring something over and stay connected with his family. And for Kamada-san here, her ikigai, even though she's the spiritual leader of her village, her ikigai is her great, great, great granddaughter. And these 2 girls are separated in age by 101.5 years. And when I asked her what it feels like holding a descendant more than a century younger than her, she said, it feels like leaping into heaven. And you can kind of tell by the look on her face that this is how you want to be when you're 103 years old. And you'll find that most of these prescriptors or most of these insights that people in blue zones offer us for living longer also kind of assure that the journey is rich and worthwhile. On our side of the pond, about 80 miles southeast of Los Angeles, not too far from where Seth is right now, we found America's blue zone off the San Bernardino Freeway. It was a very unlikely place to find a blue zone because when I got off the exit, the first thing I saw was a Del Taco and a Wiener Hut. But if you go a little bit deeper in Loma Linda, California, you find the highest concentration of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. Adventists are conservative Methodists who distinguish themselves from other Methodists in that, number one, they evangelize with health. They run some of the biggest hospitals in United States. But number two, they celebrate their Sabbath not on Sunday, but on Saturday, which makes them, the other blue zones were sort of geographically remote. These guys are a little culturally remote insofar as, Friday night when Sabbath starts, their kids don't play football or go to dances. Saturday morning, they're pretty engaged in their religion and quiet time. But they're doing something that merits attention. Life expectancy for women in America right now is 80. It's actually gone down a little bit because of COVID. We lost about a year of life expectancy in the last year. So I guess it's kind of been a wash, but anyway. Life expectancy for Adventist women is 89. And the difference for men is even more remarkable. Adventist men live about 10 years longer than their North American counterparts. So think about that for a second. These aren't people living in some faraway part of the world. These are Americans living about a decade longer than us. And by the way, these are largely years without chronic disease. How do they do it? Do they have better genes? No. If you look at an Adventist population, you see mostly people of European extraction, but you have African Americans, Asians, Latinos. It's a melting pot. So they're doing something. They're doing something right. Well, what do? First of all, they take the Sabbath very seriously. And I actually think there's something to this, that at least 24 hours a week, they're downshifting, no matter where the boss is telling them no matter what the boss is telling them to do, or work is telling them what they need to be doing right now, no matter where the kids need to be driven, no matter what the social schedule dictates, they take 24 hours a week and they focus on their family on Friday night, on their God on Saturday morning. They have these potlucks every Saturday afternoon, not exactly a moai, but it's a chance to reinforce that social circle. On Saturday afternoon, hardwired right in their scriptures, they take a nature walk. The definition of which is evolved, but nevertheless, they're doing something active every week, and not just for a few months when, there's a wellness program at work or they're trying to train for a marathon. This is something that's done for years or decades, or indeed even a lifetime. They take their diet directly from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, God lays out pretty clearly the diet for the Garden of Eden. Every plant that bears seeds, so think about that, that's nuts and beans and grains, and then every tree that bears fruit, which is, citrus and apples and tomatoes and avocado, etc. So they take that pretty seriously. Most Adventists are vegetarian, or at least plant slant. There's a big number of them, in fact, that are completely vegan, but definitely a plant-oriented subculture in America here. Adventists tend to hang out with other Adventists. And we now know that health behaviors are as contagious as catching a cold, and the contagions that circulate through Adventist network tend to be positive. They're not gathering around a pork ribs or doing shots of bourbon. They sort of gather around spiritual support, or they plan their nature walk together, or a potluck. And it's just a lot easier to stay healthy when the people around you are staying healthy. And that's something certainly the Adventists benefit from. This is a culture that has produced Ellsworth Wareham. Ellsworth, when I met him, 95 years old, multimillionaire, by the way, had all the money he needed. Yet when a contractor wanted $6,000 to build a privacy fence in his backyard, he's like, well, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. And for the next 3 days, he was out hauling timber, shoveling cement, and predictably, perhaps, on the fourth day, he ends up in the operating room, but not as the open heart surgeon on the table there. That's Ellsworth on the left doing open heart surgery, which he continued to do to age 98. Ed Rawlings, working cowboy, 106 years old, starts his day with a swim, and on the weekends he puts on the boards. And then my dear friend, I got to know her very well, Marge Jeton, 105 years old, woke up every morning at 6 a.m., spent 30 minutes reading her Bible meditatively. Then she had her breakfast, and she was very prescriptive about her breakfast. Slow cooked steel cut oatmeal with soy milk, nuts, some chopped dates, followed by what she called a prune juice shooter. And then she'd go down and lift weights. She'd ride her bicycle, and she'd get in her 1994 Cadillac, where she barreled down the San Bernardino Freeway, volunteering for 7 different organizations a week, including the Loma Linda Senior Center, where she went every Tuesday and Thursday to help out the old folks. Of course, we're about 30 years younger than she was, but never mind. So I wrote up these 3 cultures for this cover story for Geographic. It turned into the book, The Blue Zones. I went on to find 2 more blue zones, took the money I earned from the book, found a 4th blue zone in the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. This is an area that has the lowest rate of middle-age mortality in the world. So despite their relative poverty, they're about 2.5 times more likely to reach that healthy age of 94 than Americans do. How do they do it? Well, I argue they have the best diet the human species has ever invented. 3 simple ingredients: corn, which is whole grain, which is ground up into tortillas. That's all it is corn, mixed with squash and beans. And you mix those 3 together, you have all the amino acids, or which is to say protein, necessary for human sustenance. I know we got a question from one of you guys wondering if plant-based protein is good as animal-based protein, and the answer is it's much better. Average American gets about twice as much protein as we need. Most of the protein, if you're getting it from meat, cheese, or eggs, is laden with saturated fat. Much higher concentrations of toxins, hormones, etc. Plant-based proteins, although they don't absorb quite as quickly, you get plenty of them by eating whole food plant-based diet. And this 3 Sisters has propelled the whole Mesoamerican world for almost 5,000 years, and it is still propelling longevity in Nicoya today. Perfect real food. The longevity secret in Nicoya expands beyond just tradition here. In about 1990, what's that? In about 1990, Costa Rica instituted a teams of basic health professionals. The team only had 5 people: a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a record keeper, and 2 mobile health ambassadors like Louisa here. And every man, woman, and child in Costa Rica had the right to 1 visit a year. Now, Costa Rica's healthcare system is not one you want to go to for complex cancer treatment or necessarily even open heart surgery. But when it comes to public health, they're way ahead of us. Every man, woman, and child gets 1 visit a year. People like Louisa will have your health records. So she'll ask you how you're doing. She'll screen you for depression. So take your blood pressure, your blood sugar level. They're much more likely to catch a chronic disease before it's a 3-alarm fire and you end up in the hospital for it. If the first signs of a diabetes or heart disease, they're immediately sent to one of the health clinics, the local clinics, where there's a doctor assigned to everybody and just a general practitioner, but they'll jump on the problem early. People like Louisa will go in your backyard and look for standing water, which is a clear risk factor for infectious disease like dengue or malaria or Zika. She'll go into your refrigerator and look at what you're eating and give you a heads up on the foods that might be contributing to chronic disease. And they stay on top of it. So they invest heavily and effectively in prevention. And as the result is, you not only have 3 times more people making it to a healthy age, 97. This woman is 106, believe it or not. But they spend 1/15 the amount we do on healthcare to achieve that. So it underscores the notion you do not have to be rich to be healthy. You just have to deploy those resources, not just fixing the disease after it happens, but making sure it doesn't happen in the first place. And finally, the last blue zone, the island of Ikaria. I got a question if there were more blue zones. I don't think there are, but there may be one. You'll find out about that in about a year. We're still doing the background research, but we know the last blue zone, Ikaria, Greece, just 20 miles off the coast of Turkey, very isolated place, 10,000 people. No natural harbors, which have kept invaders out of Ikaria. And they've been able to incubate their own special culture / environment of longevity. They live about 8 years longer than Americans, half the rate of heart disease, but most interestingly, only about 1/5 the rate of dementia. So almost no Alzheimer's disease here, which is very interesting. Proof that evidence supporting that about 80 to 90% of Alzheimer's disease is preventable. We don't realize that, or our zeal for searching for the cure, we kind of miss, which was right in front of us, which is there are lifestyles that we know produce sharp brains to the very end. And we see it among this population of 10,000 people in Ikaria. They eat the purest variety of the Mediterranean diet. This particular one's very high in greens, probably 6 or 7 times more varieties of greens and herbs than we consume. Very high in beans and potatoes. And like all blue zones, people are staying active into their 90s and 100s. This 103-year-old priest who still attends to his flock on an ATV. I like to tell the story of this little fellow to the right, and different than I would say, the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. The way we tell stories at National Geographic is we metabolize vast amounts of scientific research, and then we find characters who can help us tell that story. And really the best character to tell the Blue Zone story was this little fellow on the right. His name is Stamaitis Moriaitis, Icarian. At age 21, he moves to America to seek the American dream. He starts working hard, sure enough, saves money. He buys a Chevrolet, a house in the suburbs, and gets married to a Greek-American woman. The American dream. Unfortunately, at age 66, he finds himself short of breath. He goes to 3 doctors, all of whom tell him terminal lung disease, get your affairs in order, you'll be gone in 6 months. Instead of dying in Detroit, he figures he'll get buried for a fraction of the price with his ancestors in Ikaria. So he and his wife move back to Ikaria, and they move in with his parents, who are in their 80s and just fine. He starts breathing the air, drinking the wine, eating that Icarian diet, connecting with his friends. He connects with his religion. 6 months come and go. He's feeling pretty good. He goes out in his backyard and he plants a vineyard. He knows he's not going to be around to harvest those grapes, but he thinks, my wife will harvest these grapes. And when she drinks this wine, she'll think of me. Well, to make a long story medium, 34 years later, when I met him at age 101, he was not only picking all those grapes, but he was turning them into 200 liters of wine a year, all which he drank. And when I asked him what his secret to longevity was, I was pretty sure it wasn't his ability to match plaids. He just kind of shrugged and said, I don't know, I guess I just forgot to die, which seems flippant and unscientific, but I got to tell you, this is probably the most accurate explanation of any of the explanations that all the longevity researchers I interacted with for this story. The reason is that no matter where you go in the world and you see people making it to 100, it's really, when I'm talking people, I mean population, it's not really their genes, only 20%. None of them said at age 50, well, God darn it, I'm going to get on that longevity diet and live another 50 years. None of them bought a Stairmaster or joined CrossFit or called an 800 number and started taking supplements or drinking power drinks. They just lived their life. And the reason they lived for 100 is not because they pursued health. That's what we do in America. We get on the program, we think we're going to muster 5 decades of discipline and focus of mind and live to 100. No, they live in environments where the healthy choice is not only the easy choice, but the unavoidable choice. So these 9 common denominators, they're not really exercising. And by the way, exercise has been an unmitigated failure when it comes to public health in the United States. Only about 15% of people get enough exercise or quote physical activity. People in the blue zones, they're moving every 20 minutes, not because they're on some program, but because every time they go to work, every time they go to their friend's house, every time they go out to eat, it occasions a walk. They have gardens out back, so they're nudged into weeding or watering or harvesting plants. Their houses aren't filled with mechanical conveniences. They're still doing yard work by hand and housework by hand and kitchen work by hand. When it comes to their outlook, they suffer the same stresses that we do, but they have sacred daily rituals that reduce the stress of everyday living. Ancestor venerations like the Okinawans, taking a nap like the Costa Ricans and the Icarians. The Adventists pray, which is a form of meditation, and the Sardinians, they just do happy hour, which is my practice. They have vocabulary for purpose, which is worth about 7 years of life expectancy over being rudderless in the world. When it comes to what they consume, yes, they do drink a little bit, 2 to 3 glasses a day, but not a 14 drink binge on the weekends, spread out. When it comes to what they eat, my book, Blue Zones Solution, distilled a meta-analysis of 155 dietary studies done in all 5 blue zones over the past 100 years. And if you want to know what a centenarian ate to live to be 100, here it is. And this is manifest. 90 to 100% unprocessed plant-based foods. It's very high carbohydrates, but not the simple carbohydrates like lollipops. We're talking the complex carbohydrates like lentil beans. The 5 pillars of every longevity diet in the world are whole grains, greens, tubers like potatoes and sweet potatoes, nuts, and then I argue the greatest longevity food in the world is beans. In Blue Zones, people are eating a cup of beans a day, and my team calculates if you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's probably adding about 4 years to your life expectancy. They do eat meat, but it's a celebratory food. We don't know if they're living longer because of these 5 servings a month or in spite of it, but meat is not part of the Blue Zone diet. They eat a lot less fish than you might think. It's middle chain fish, none of the swordfish. No cow's dairy in Blue Zones at all. You see a little bit of goat milk or sheep's milk cheese. It's very rich, but dairy is not a part of the Blue Zone diet. Water is 6 glasses a day, teas of every sort, both caffeinated and uncaffeinated. Good news for most of us, that cup or 2 of coffee you have before noon is probably a big health plus, lowering your chances of diabetes and Parkinson's disease, keeping you sharp. And wine with meals, probably a good idea. If you're drinking a glass of wine with your plant-based meal, it's probably quadrupling the antioxidant absorption of that meal, maybe even better than water. More important than what they eat is what they don't eat. They have ways to engineer calories out of their diet by eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. They keep electronics out of their kitchen, so they're not eating to their favorite TV show. They eat with their families. And then on the foundation, this is probably 40% of the longevity equation, 30 to 40%. A big focus on family, keeping your aging parent nearby, investing in your partner, investing in your children, belonging to a religion. If you belong to a faith and you show up, it's worth 4 to 14 extra years of life expectancy. And then the big one here, I would say, is paying really careful attention to who your immediate friends are. We now know that if your three best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's about 150% chance that you'll be overweight yourself. Loneliness is contagious. Drug use is contagious. Alcoholism is contagious. Happiness is contagious. Really, who your 4 or 5 top friends are going to drive your behaviors more than just about anything else. So you look at these 9 things and people say, usually after I tell them, it makes a lot of sense to me, but it's not common sense in the United States. What's common sense in the United States is we get unhealthy. We spend a little bit of money on diet, supplements, and exercise programs for health. And they're not necessarily a bad idea. They're expensive, and we're kind of like Sisyphus. We start every year on them. I mean, you take even the best diets. If I get 100 of you on them today, I'm going to lose 10% of you in just 3 months and 90% of you in 7 months and almost all of you in 2 years. If your if your financial advisor showed you this return on your money, you would fire him in a year. Yet every year we re-up with our the fairy tale that we're going to get on a diet and it's going to work for us after the New Year's resolution. Doesn't really work, nor do gym memberships. I mean, they're aspirational, but they have a pretty steep recidivism curve. Your 3/4 are gone after 2 years. And even if I come back with the pill guaranteed to reverse aging, most Americans wouldn't take it long enough to make a difference. So if that doesn't work, what does? Very clear lessons from the Blue Zone. Number one, they're eating mostly a plant-based diet, moving every 20 minutes, keeping their metabolism up because their life is underpinned with purpose. They surround themselves with the right people, and they live in places where the healthy choice is the easy choice. And the secret to longevity doesn't lie in any of these specific circles here. It rather lies in the interconnective, mutually supporting network of these things working together. So it works because as a cluster. Because when it comes to longevity, there's no pill, there's no supplement, there's no genetic intervention, even on the scientific horizon. There's no diet, there's no power drink. There's really no single thing that is going to help you avoid the wrong behaviors and keep you doing the right behaviors for long enough to keep you from getting a chronic disease. It's these interconnected things that keep you on the right program for the decades or lifetime necessary to not develop the heart disease, to not develop the diabetes, the cancer, the GI, the dementia. These are all avoidable things. They're things that we're spending $3.6 trillion a year to try to fix every year with our healthcare system. They're completely avoidable. There's easy prescriptives for just about all of these things, and it lies in not trying to change your mind, but trying to change your surroundings. Engineering your environment so the healthy choice is not only the easy choice, but the unavoidable choice. And with that, Seth, I'll turn it over to you and we can do some questions.
So awesome, Dan. I'm inspired to adopt those practices even further and to keep building our healthy network. And I think all of us at Mission Wealth are wanting to be that network for each other. So, we are the company we keep. Okay, we have a bunch of questions, Dan, so we're going to just hop in here. One question is, what life attributes were overarching across every Blue Zone? So you talked about how there were some differences. What was kind of the overarching life attribute that you saw across all of them?
What do you mean life attributes?
I think it's probably like of the people that lived there, was there one overarching? You talked about the differences, a little bit of each. In Okinawa, they had the social circles, or in a sense, do you say all these attributes are kind of universal across each of the Blue Zones?
I would say those 9 common denominators, it's kind of a dumb name, but we call it Power 9. But those are the 9 things you see among all 5 Blue Zones. The vocabulary for purpose, emphasis on family, emphasis on faith, those are I would say the common life attributes.
Got it. Dan, we have a question here about climate change. Do you see climate change impacting overall longevity in the future?
Well, it hasn't showed up yet in the blue zones, so it doesn't have to. I think climate change is sort of a parallel problem or a parallel opportunity for us to pay attention to. And by the way, I think a lot of the same things that would occasion a longer life would also start to address climate change. You know, if we switch to a 100% plant-based diet, and everybody did that, we would lower our collective carbon footprint by about 30%. If we moved away from driving places and got out from behind the wheel and onto our feet, we would lower the demand for petroleum, which would lower living in smaller places and in smaller communities that require less energy to cool and to heat. There's a very strong interconnectivity between living a long time and having a very smaller carbon footprint.
Yeah, makes sense. A question for you personally, Dan. Which of these life habits and structures have you incorporated into your life?
I eat mostly a plant-based diet. I eat a blue zone diet, except I don't eat meat at all. And I am naturally social. Before, I used to think that rewarding myself with social interactivity was a treat, but now I do it all the time. I know it's good for me. I have kind of let a few of my unhealthy friends go. It's not to say I'm not around to support them, but I don't spend as much time with them. I've really reconnected with my family and made that a big priority. I've gotten also really clear on my purpose. I think one of the best things you could do to add good years to your life is to actually take the time to do the internal inventory to know what your values are, what you're good at, what you like to do, and then an outlet for them. And for many of us, it's our work. But for most of us, it has to be something else. And to know where you can either volunteer or hobby or, what you can do for your family or a group of friends that provides an outlet for that purpose. I think that's really become important to me in the last few years.
Yeah. A question came in here. Are there examples of places in the United States outside Loma Linda where communities have been intentionally created to make the healthy choice or create that pod dynamic? Do you know examples of that in the US?
Well, my business for the last 11 years, I've been hired by insurance companies to manufacture blue zones within American cities. And that usually requires that the whole public sector, the mayor, the city council, the chamber of commerce, the superintendent of schools, that all sign on to this idea that they're going to let my team come in. I have about 200 employees that go into cities, and we literally change the environment, the policy environment, the schools, restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, comprehensively, ubiquitously, so that the healthy choice is the easy choice. And cities like Fort Worth, Texas, the beach cities of Los Angeles, Naples, Florida, the whole island of Hawaii are just a few of the communities in America that have committed to a blue zone approach to changing their environment. And in every one of them, the BMI at the population level has dropped. So the obesity rate has dropped, and that means the rate of heart disease drops, the rate of diabetes drops, and their overall healthcare cost savings amounts to, in many cases, hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Yeah, and since you're an expert on creating these communities, how would you rank Santa Barbara as far as being in the realm of healthy from what you've seen?
And not just because you're there. No, but it's definitely one of the top 20 communities in America. And I'll tell you why. First of all, Santa Barbara has easy access to nature. Very easy for people to get out and recreate. There's a big emphasis on walkability. There's easy access to healthy food all over the place, healthy restaurants. We know, I wrote this series of books on happiness, and if you 151 countries, if you survey, which has been done, survey all those countries to get the attributes of people's lives and how happy they are. People who live on the water report about 10% higher happiness than people who live inland. And everybody in Santa Barbara lives on the water. It also has a very strong volunteer community, nonprofit. I think it's probably the highest concentration of philanthropy in the United States. So all of those contribute to not only higher life expectancy, but I know from Gallup that Santa Barbara is, I believe, 11th in the country with the highest level of life satisfaction. So yeah, you guys have something special going on there.
Great. Dan, we're getting some questions about Blue Zone cookbooks. Could you give us any updates on anything that might be in the works as far as cookbooks? That was teed up nicely.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Blue Zone's kitchen did very well, and publisher asked if I could do one focused in the United States, and there aren't enough communities of longevity to really put a book together. And by the way, Blue Zone's kitchen it's not just recipes. It's actually kind of anthropology. I collected these from, I sat and observed them and wrote them down, and we have a National Geographic photographer shot all the images, and I did the science reporting. United States right now, about 700,000 people die a year eating the standard American diet. They die unnecessarily. That's from the CDC. But it turns out, if you look back about 100 years, you see a food tradition, actually 4 food traditions where people ate essentially the Blue Zone diet, which is to say, almost completely whole food, plant-based. And those diets were among African Americans, Asians, Latinos, and Native Americans. And it's a tradition largely lost. And the photographer and I have been traveling across America for the past year. We got another 3 months to go, all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, North and South, finding chef historians who have preserved those food traditions. And we're recreating the recipes and aggregating the dietary studies done 100 years ago, and rebuilding a different standard American diet that, instead of being our most toxic export, can be a gift to the rest of the world. And again, it's among, the ethnic people. It wasn't my ancestors, the Germans and the Scandinavians, who came there with their cows and pigs and pickling. It's really the darker Americans that contribute the biggest to America's culinary tradition.
Well, that's going to be great to read. Dan, we have questions on sleep. Have there been any trends that you've seen with regards to sleep in the Blue Zones, number of hours per night, and then also on vitamin D, time in sunshine? Are those contributing factors to longevity?
So traditionally in Blue Zones, and I've even observed it as recently as 6 years ago, the sun goes down, people go to bed soon thereafter. They wake up maybe 4 or 5 and they'll do some chores, and then they'll go back in bed for a second sleep and sleep until sunrise. That's pretty common. About 8 hours a day is average, 8 to 9, somewhere in there. So that, I think that's the ideal. Americans sleep about 6.2 hours, and we're robbing ourselves of a lot of life by thinking that, if we short shrift our sleep, we can get more life during the day. We actually don't. People who don't get enough sleep are much more likely to develop heart disease. They're much more likely to be obese. They're not as sharp. So getting sleep is really important.
Right.
What was the second question?
Then another question is about the wine that you mentioned. Are they making it from scratch, and will it ever be available for mass purchase?
Yes. So it's made both commercially and at homemade in Blue Zones. The wine made in homes tends to be pretty rough. Um, but actually, a passion project of mine for the past 5 years has been finding the best Cannonau grapes, which is a Grenache grape. They're very red. What makes them red is they're exposed to 330 days of hard sunlight a year, and they respond by creating grape sunscreen, which is essentially the pigment. And it's in that pigment where the antioxidants and the resveratrol and the procyanids are. And I found a professional vintner to blend the grapes and create a Blue Zones wine. You can Google Blue Zones wine and you can find it. You can actually order it here in the United States. That has not only the antioxidant properties, but it's been rated a 92 by Wine Spectator. So it's a very good wine, but it's also, I like to say, good for you or better for you anyway.
Nice.
But there are several other brands of Cannonau, and if you're in a big city and you go to a big reputable liquor store, you can often find several different kinds of Cannonau wine, and that's the Sardinian Blue Zone wine.
Great. Dan, do you believe that it's possible if people apply these Blue Zones, lifestyles, as well as with modern day medicine, that it'll be realistic, people will live to 110, maybe even 120, more commonly, even in the US, say in the next 30 to 50 years? Will that be a trend that you think is realistic?
That'd be a little bit like predicting the invention of penicillin 5 years before penicillin was accidentally discovered. The pace of discovery is encouraging, but right now, life expectancy since about 1840 has gone up by about 2 years per decade. Pretty straight line. And I think those of us listening right now on this podcast, if you've made it to 60 and you've been reasonably healthy, your life expectancy is probably 90 right now. Actually, if you go to the Blue Zones website, we have this life expectancy calculator called the Vitality Compass, and it will calculate how long you're going to live. And to make it to 100 right now in the United States, you have about a 1 in 4,000 chance. So you have to kind of win the genetic lottery to make it to 100 right now. And most of us haven't won that lottery. But here's the good news. If you're doing everything right, and by the way, it's never too late to start. If you're doing everything right, you've been doing everything right most of your life expectancy right now is probably 92 or 94. But given the fact that life expectancy tends to go up 2 years per per decade, and most of us have 3 to 4 decades in front of us, theoretically, yes. 94 right now, 3 more decades at 2 years per decade, that's 6 years. Yes, we could hit 100. 110 is a reach.
Got it.
Right now, about 1 in 20 million people make it to 110. And I just don't see anything on the scientific horizon that's going to produce that. Here's the thing. The way our bodies, all mammals, lived about two and a half times the age of procreation. So when you can first start having babies, most mammals, whether you're a mouse or an elephant, they live another two and a half times that age. So, if you start having babies at 15, 2.5 times that was 37 and a half. For most of human history, our life expectancy has been about 33. And the reason for that is we're really here for procreative success. We're here to have babies, make sure those babies grow up old enough to have babies themselves, help those grandchildren get through the first years, and then your sort of genetic leftovers, and you get out of the way so that the younger generations can consume the resources and keep the species going. That's how evolution kind of works. But over the last 150 years, really since the mid or the late 19th century, we've come up with interventions to mitigate infectious disease, penicillin and antibiotics. And then, now chronic disease has been an issue. And we're really focused on overcoming heart disease and cancer and diabetes. So, but at a certain point, our bodies reach their ceiling. The body just kind of falls apart. It's called senescence, and it occurs when cells no longer or reproduce themselves, and that's usually in the 90s, and that's why, you know, even if you do everything right, most of us drop dead at 94 or 95, and that's kind of a maximum. But I don't see anything on the scientific horizon that's going to raise the ceiling of the capacity of the human machine.
Got it. Thank you. Dan, one last question for you. We shared about your epic journey through each of your decades, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. Now you're 60. Tell us something you're really looking forward to in this decade ahead. What's something that lights you up about the next 10 years and something you hope to experience or create or enjoy?
Yeah, the beauty of this age, I think we still have another couple decades of vitality, and most of us have made enough money. And instead of pursuing more, more money or more recognition or status, I'm excited about giving back and doing so in a way that allows me to put my personal sense of purpose to work. And I have a year off. I sold Blue Zones, or most of it, this year. So I have a year to get clear on that. And I'm going off now to Latin America, and I'm going to meditate for a couple of weeks. So I don't exactly know what it is right now, but I have a general idea and a general direction. And I'm going to dedicate my 60s to doing just that.
Well, Dan, thank you so much. You gave back to all of us today, and we truly appreciate your time. And I know that we want to be able to apply these lessons in our own lives. And again, we'll be sharing a recording of today's program, as well as a blog post of the top takeaways, so we can put those on our fridge and put those on our computer and keep them front and center in our lives. And we'll also be sending you a survey link. We really do appreciate your feedback, and would love to know what other topics would be of greatest interest to you that we can bring incredible speakers like Dan to cover. And I'm happy to announce our next Inspired Talk will be on July 15th with Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo. Elizabeth is also a best-selling author, and she's known as being America's most trusted celebrity psychologist. So she's going to be talking about the emotional and family dimensions of life, how we can improve our emotional resilience, mental wellness, overall well-being and relationships. And please see the registration link here in the chat, and we'll also be emailing you a link if you'd like to get signed up. We have other Inspired Living programs coming up, including in May, the Conversation Circles, where we'll be discussing this theme of health and longevity that Dan teed up so beautifully. And we do have separate groups for men and for women. And then in June, we have our next Wisdom Share event, where we crowdsource the best ideas for living fulfilled lives across the 11 dimensions of life. And clients are truly enjoying these programs, so please speak to your client advisor to learn more. This concludes today's program. Thank you all for joining. Thank you again, Dan. And here's to our inspired living. Thank you.